Dear brothers and sisters, today we will continue with Genesis 29 to 32. Genesis 29 tells the story of Jacob's journey to the land of his ancestors and his encounter with his uncle Laban. Jacob arrived at a well and met Laban's daughter, Rachel. He fell in love with her and agreed to work for Laban for 7 years in exchange for Rachel's hand in marriage. When the 7 years were up, Laban tricked Jacob and gave him his other daughter, Leah, instead of Rachel. Jacob was angry, but Laban agreed to let him marry Rachel as well if he worked for another 7 years. Jacob married both Rachel and Leah and had children with them. However, Rachel was unable to conceive, so she gave her servant Bilhah to Jacob as a wife, and she bore him 2 sons. Leah also gave her servant Zilpah to Jacob as a wife, and she bore him 2 sons as well. Jacob worked for Laban for a total of 20 years, but eventually, he decided to return home with his family. Laban tried to persuade him to stay, but Jacob refused and left with his wives and children. Overall, Genesis 29 teaches us about the importance of family, the consequences of deception, and the power of perseverance. It also highlights the cultural practices of the time, including the use of servants as wives to bear children. In Genesis 30, Rachel, one of Jacob's wives, was unable to have children, while Leah, Jacob's other wife, had 4 sons. Rachel became envious of Leah and gave her maid Bilhah to Jacob as a wife so that she could have children through her. Bilhah had 2 sons, and Rachel named them. Leah, on the other hand, gave her maid Zilpah to Jacob, who also had 2 sons. Leah named them as well. Eventually, Rachel was able to conceive and gave birth to Joseph, who would later become an important figure in the Bible. Jacob worked for Laban, his father-in-law, for many years and had many children with his wives and their maids. This chapter highlights the cultural practice of using maids to bear children and the importance of childbearing in the ancient world. It also shows the complex relationships and competition between the wives and their desire to bear children for Jacob. Genesis 31 tells the story of Jacob's departure from his father-in-law Laban's household. Jacob had been working for Laban for many years and had acquired a large number of flocks and herds. However, Laban's sons became jealous of Jacob's success and mistreated him. One night, God appeared to Jacob and instructed him to return to his homeland with his family and possessions. Jacob secretly gathered his wives and children, along with his flocks and herds, and set out for Canaan. When Laban discovered that Jacob had left, he pursued him and caught up with him several days later. After a heated exchange, they made a covenant of peace and parted ways. Overall, Genesis 31 teaches us about the importance of standing up for ourselves and our families when we are being mistreated. It also emphasizes the idea that God will protect and guide us on our journeys. In Genesis 32, Jacob was on his way back home when he heard that his estranged brother Esau was coming to meet him with 400 men. Jacob was afraid that Esau was coming to seek revenge against him, as he had taken Esau's birthright and blessing many years ago. Jacob prayed to God for help and sent gifts to Esau in an attempt to appease him. He also sent his family and possessions across the river, while he stayed behind alone to pray. That night, Jacob wrestled with a man until daybreak. The man touched Jacob's hip, causing it to go out of joint, but Jacob refused to let go until the man blessed him. The man revealed himself as God and gave Jacob a new name, Israel, which means, "He who struggles with God." Jacob realized that he had been wrestling with God and that he had seen God face to face. Jacob reunited with Esau the next day, and they embraced each other in forgiveness and reconciliation. This chapter teaches us about the power of prayer, the importance of seeking forgiveness, and the transformative nature of encountering God. We will continue the next chapters in the next video. Thank you and God bless you. Amen.